Hey guys, welcome to Forum. I hope everyone's doing well. Second years, I hope you're having a good first round of portfolios. Anyway, so today we are joined by Eric Cruz. He's going to be talking about architecting worlds beyond belief, virtual worlds and virtual events, for immersive experiences. To give you a little bit of background about who he is. He's a co-executive director at DDB San Francisco. He's a Filipino-American globalist. He's a creative leader, designer, and educator, creative hybrid of sorts with 23 years of global industry experience, exploring digital storytelling, design, innovation, and experience. He has worked with forward-thinking brands including Nike, Jordan, Converse, Apple, Airbnb, Google, Meta, and currently oversees at Aura, iShares, SurveyMonkey, Energy, Upgrade California, and NBA 2K. Recently, he helped bring to life the DC fandom, creating a metaverse gaming experience for Warner Brothers games, and collaborate with Facebook Reality Labs to define the product experience for Facebook and Ray-Ban's new smart glasses. Prior to DDB, Eric was the ECD at Sidley USA and Digital Kitchen, AKQA Shanghai, and Leo Burnett Malaysia. Wieden+Kennedy is where he grew up and learned how not to do advertising, spending 11 years in its Portland, Tokyo, and London studios. He co-founded and ran Wieden+Kennedy's Tokyo Lab, Wieden+Kennedy's experimental outlet and music label. His work has been recognized at Tokyo ADC, Cannes Lions, ADC New York, One Show, New Bloods, Spikes, AdFest, AdStars, the Webbies, the FWA, CSS Design Awards, and Japan Media Arts Festival. So I'm just gonna let Eric take it away from here, and we can start.
Hi, everyone. How's everyone doing? You all good? Cool. Everyone can see my screen, yeah? Cool. So first of all, thanks VCU for inviting me to speak. It's an honor to be speaking with you guys because I came from there. I was there in the early 90s before Brand Center was ever formed, but I was there in the School of the Arts, predominantly working, studying design and illustration. But I have kept in touch with that school over the years because I was friends with the people who kind of started that school up, the faculty who did. So thank you again for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to be interacting with you guys. So what I thought would be interesting for me to talk about today is a subject that I'm deeply passionate about, because building the next world, a virtual one, is sort of something that I think is inevitable, but also something that I've kind of come to expect, seeing as to how I started in this field, in this career, sometime in '96, basically kind of the first iteration of what we're calling the internet. And it kind of grew up in this whole thing over the last 23, 25 years. And I'm really, really excited about, sort of what's up ahead. The world that we were born in is a very different world that we live in today. 2020, the year of COVID, will go down in history perhaps as the year the world shifted gears into a much more digital realm. And I think it's fair to say that over the last 2 years since, we've seen some amazing leaps in digital innovation, accelerating our evolution into virtual worlds and experiences that are pretty much beyond our imagination. So it was in many ways an evolution largely driven by the pandemic, but somehow precisely timed, where technology was actually right enough for us to figure out how to survive and get through it, meaning reinvent the world that we live in and learn how to live in a much more digital virtual environment. So in many ways, COVID forced us to innovate and accelerate our lives. And I think as a result of that, not by choice, but by necessity, because the only way we could connect safely with each other was basically online. And I think many of us kind of foresaw this, in that video games really started to rise to the top as a kind of new media of choice, because brands saw new opportunities to communicate in the spaces where people were already being entertained by whiling away their time during a global pandemic lockdown. So I think, to me, gaming forever changed 2020 and the rest of the world, because it allowed us new ways to access that world. Everything from how we educated our kids to how we socialized, how we collaborated, even how we were entertained and experienced the world. Gaming provided a space, a safe space for people to interact. If we think about Minecraft's Blockdown, it provided a space of refuge where people learned how to combat the pandemic one block at a time. So this is a free-to-play pandemic simulator that we're looking at, which informed and educated players what to actually do and how to cope with the COVID-19 crisis in-game. So what I love about this project is that the strategy of encouraging people to actually physically stay at home was disguised as entertainment in order to defeat the virus. So I think, people started reaching out and kind of communicating to the rest of the population through this sort of game called Blockdown, in order to simulate how to best sort of like curb the pandemic. Another example is in the run-up to the 2020 elections, we saw politicians turning to gaming to basically, hold their campaigns, their rally, their supporters, and turn it into kind of the new virtual town hall. So I'm sure most of you were paying attention in what was going on then. But one example of that would be the Build the Vote campaign that was done also in Minecraft, which basically kind of aimed to engage, inspire, and educate future and first-time voters about the election process. Now, surprisingly, most American youth don't know enough about the voting process itself, how it works, and the power and consequence of that vote. So Build the Vote invited American youth to step up, do their homework, and exercise their right to vote. And for players who may still be too young, such as my 11-year-old daughter at the time, it encouraged them to actually get involved with the election process very early on. So what I love about this is that, again, when people couldn't rally and campaign in real life, they turned to spaces and places like this to be able to rally their crowd, rally their base. So another example of that we saw of that is Biden HQ, where basically the Biden-Harris campaign, about 18 days before the election, they basically pivoted into that space to rethink how could they organize and energize voters and rally them safely? And how do they find supporters actually where they're already at, which is at home online playing these video games? So coinciding with the popularity of the newly released game Animal Crossing: New Horizons, they engage players through Biden HQ, offering digital swag and voter education tools, as well as organizing in-game events and rallies. But it goes beyond this space. I think even in one sector, such as travel and tourism, which is pretty hit big during the pandemic, I think in 2020, everyone started traveling local, limited by transport and safety restrictions. Here's a very interesting example created by one of my ex-AKQA Shanghai creatives. It's called Window Swap. And essentially the idea here is that the internet essentially allowed you to travel and see the world simply from your browser, right? So if you can actually fly to all these distant places, this project allowed you to enjoy the views from around the world and experience it through other people's windows. So essentially, you kind of just had a live feed of what was outside your window, and through Window Swap as a web experiment, you could basically travel the world just from your desktop. A very interesting project to have taken place. Obviously, it could have only happened during the pandemic itself, in that people were really kind of hungry to see the world, but couldn't physically do so. And in the last couple of years, the fashion world descended into a very new and intimate partnership with gaming, unlike we've ever seen before, using virtual spaces as the latest sort of fashion runway. So in November 2019, digital fashion pioneers like the Fabricant sold the iridescence dress for $9,500. So why this is so pivotal and important was because it was the world's first digital-only dress that was sold on the blockchain. And what that really represented in the moment in time is digital-only couture fashion. So that's, to me, kind of the tipping point of how even fashion started to become fully virtual, was at that moment at the end of 2019. This next example is a very interesting one, in that for the release of and the debut of their All Out album, League of Legends partnered with K-pop group KDA, a virtual band, And basically that virtual band dressed in Louis Vuitton fashion from its 2014, 2015, 2019 collections. And since then, video games have actually become a new space where people actually experience fashion beyond traditional runways. So here's a little snippet of what that looks and sounds like for the League of Legends opening ceremony in Shanghai. I think a very interesting example of how the real and the virtual started to collide, even in live events such as that. And again, keep in mind that was in 2019, pre-pandemic. So sometime in 2020, Bathing Ape also had a League of Legends line, except this time outfitting virtual characters in game and essentially being used within the game itself. So obviously what we're seeing here is that fashion itself started to really evolve and move into virtual spaces, but also started to become kind of collectibles that basically anyone who's gaming is starting to pay attention to and starting to collect and buy in the digital space. But perhaps to me, the biggest sort of example that I could kind of come up with was in December of 2020, Balenciaga themselves took the game much, much higher, skipping Fashion Week to launch its fall 2021 capsule collection, not in game, but actually creating their own game called Afterworld, The Age of Tomorrow. So imagine, basically no fashion brand has ever done a virtual kind of experience like this before, but essentially kind of setting a storyline that is a post-apocalyptic 2031 game invented and created just to be able to feature a fall fashion collection. And I think what this really signaled was this move away from the physical and all the way into investing into virtual spaces that could really transform us into a different dimension, a different zone, literally, and create storytelling that was much more immersive. A year later, in December 2021, I think most of you probably have known or heard by now of a company called RTFKT, basically digital sneaker pioneers who were acquired by Nike. And again, signaling a kind of big move for the fashion industry, in that obviously a brand like Nike starting to own the sort of virtual clothing space, the virtual fashion space, and really starting to think about their future roadmap within that sector. And I think most of this, the next example is not going to be any news for you guys, being youth culture. It's an example of how music itself evolved ever since 2020 happened. And Travis Scott's 2020 Fortnite in-game concert experience is certainly probably the best and prime example of that. But we also then started to see how that started to evolve and roll out into Roblox signing multiple music partnerships and multiple music sort of events and artists such as Lil Nas. But perhaps one of the more recent examples of that being earlier in January 2022, we then saw Warner Music started to enter spaces like Sandbox, which I think, again, is a very big signal of how music labels, content creators, film studios are all starting to kind of figure out what will be our presence and what will be our industry moving forward into the future, into this place called the metaverse. And another sector that we want to highlight is essentially how the art world itself, it has not been immune to this transformation. So I thought an interesting thing that I read during that time was that somebody predicted that 1/3 of France's galleries could be out of business by the end of 2020 as a result of the pandemic, meaning no one was going to art galleries. And by nature of art being itself, how it was bought, sold, and experienced then started to pivot into a new medium. And pre-pandemic or during the pandemic itself, we saw KAWS release an AR experience where basically he was selling and is selling his artworks in a very virtual space and environment. And essentially imagine this being a kind of collection that he releases, but virtually, and people could buy 25 pieces of these artworks for 10 grand each, and then be able to own that and choose where to show it, who to share it with, and basically who experiences this piece of art. I'm sure most of you by now are very well aware of Beeple's auction, and I'm not gonna go necessarily into that, but I think that again kind of signaled a shift in terms of NFT sort of booming across the world, so much so that even industries such as ours, meaning advertising and design, saw a kind of huge brain drain in people, in that you couldn't find 3D animators or 3D artists to basically work on anything commercial, because everyone started to essentially want to become an NFT artist because they saw a greener pasture on that side. But perhaps a news that maybe some of you may not have heard of because of a very recent one is that Cause himself essentially created an exhibition on Fortnite's creative mode, essentially recreating the Serpentine Gallery exhibition called New Fiction. So again, kind of a signal of where things are heading and how things are kind of evolving. And even how we existed in the world, meaning our own very physical beings, started to also evolve. And here's a very interesting example that maybe many of you have not seen, but this is Project Vincent. And the significance of Project Vincent is that it actually preceded the thing called MetaHumans, which I'm sure most of you have heard by now by Epic Games, but this was 1.5 to 2 years earlier than the MetaHumans launch. Right. And I think that to me is kind of an early foray into virtual beings and virtual sort of characters. But when MetaHumans sort of came out from Epic Games, that's kind of the tipping point of when we started to see sort of critical mass going down and sort of in many ways powering a new world ahead. And maybe some of you have seen this and maybe not, but a few, basically just kind of last week, Unity 3D, basically a gaming engine platform, came out with a trailer for Enemies. And what I find really significant about this example is how real and lifelike 3D worlds have become. But I think more importantly, it's going to really set the stage for how movies and storytelling will be done in the not too distant future. So if you look at this, I'll play a bit of it for you. But imagine, you know, all beyond fantastical worlds and beyond sort of a suspension of disbelief in reality, what's going to be interesting is to see how actors and even supermodels, when we digitize them in 3D, how they will end up living forever. And what I mean by that is when someone is digitized in the current state, you're going to be able to sort of retain your consciousness, retain your sort of personality, and think of that lasting forever and being able to be applied into multiple different IPs moving forward in time. So here's that piece of trailer, and I'll just play it for you a bit.
I have in my head everything that anyone has ever known. You have in your heart everything anyone has ever felt. Power is given only to those who dare to lower themselves and pick it up.
What is amazing about that is sort of not just the level of fidelity, but the level of acting delivery and believability that gaming engines are starting to have. And I think that's going to be the tipping point and transformational moment where movies and every kind of content that's being produced and made will start to become more and more like this. And the fact that this is possible now is exactly what is so exciting and at the same time earth-shattering and sort of a bit scary about it. Even if we look at an example of how the type of people that we follow, the models we look up to, the people we admire, that has also evolved over the last 2 years or so. If you've been paying attention to what Prada has been doing, you probably may have seen a virtual model named Candy that they essentially enlisted to become a spokesperson for their perfume brand, also called Candy. And I think, again, kind of a big move inspired by the likes of virtual celebrities like Little Michaela. But if we look at even how that has kind of, gone and penetrated into NFT spaces, I think a very interesting example would be Jenkins the Valet from the Bored Ape Yacht Club's fame. So if you look at that, it's essentially an example of a virtual NFT who was signed by CAA for artist representation in February of 2022. What does that mean? It means that whoever owns Jenkins the Ballet will have all the usage rights, all of the residuals, all of the sort of IP payments that NFT will generate. And if you think about it, it's sort of like investing in a Hollywood celebrity, but owning it for life if you choose to keep it that way, and getting residuals for the rest of your life yourself. So I think that's, to me, a huge game changer in that, the world that we live in is going to start changing in different ways and more ways than we could ever thought possible. The world that we were born in is different than the world we live in today. So how we see, how we learn, how we collaborate, how we get educated, how we play, how we travel, and how we experience and how we feel has forever changed. And in many ways, the pandemic accelerated human evolution, forcing companies to pivot and shift online. And so we've seen huge phenomenal innovation across the world, from new platforms to virtual experiences to products that meet real world needs, except only virtual. As creatives and designers, we're in a very unique position to reshape the world and create a better future. But to create tomorrow, we must challenge and reinvent the everyday starting today. So I wanted to switch gears a little bit and kind of share with you some of the work that I've been up to and have been helping kind of form and shape. And all of these type of examples I'm going to share with you are really ones that explore this theme of inventing and co-creating the next world, co-creating the future. This first one is a project from about 3.5 to 4 years ago during my time at AKQA in Shanghai. So it's an example of how we could rethink and reinvent the retail experience itself, meaning how we sort of buy stuff, right? But doing so in a much more virtual way. So think of this kind of like Pokemon Go, if that was the kind of shopping experience. And imagine where the retail store is something that you could take anywhere with you and can be mapped out in your current location. So this one's called the Nike Never Done Shop. And it was part of a Shanghai City Attack campaign that I did. And the brief was really simple. The brief was turn sport into a habit. So we came up with a very simple and interesting concept that used sweat, right? Sweat as your only means to pay in a virtual store. Sweat as currency, or as we called it, sweat coins. So you could imagine 4 years ago is sort of when Bitcoins was sort of coming out, but taking that sort of initial thought and you kind of just wondering if we could, inspire people to do 2 times more sport, or to actually inspire them to continue doing sport in order to turn it into a habit, what would we use as a kind of incentive? So again, our strategy was do sport to earn more sport. And so the proposition we came up with was essentially kind of a 360 AR shop that you could trigger anywhere and everywhere you were, where sweat is your only currency to buy limited edition products, services, and experiences. By products, imagine exclusive sneaker drops that you can't buy in real store. By services, imagine if you're a runner and after your sort of 1 hour or 3K or 5K run, you want to stretch your body. Perhaps you order Dr. Stretch, meaning a stretching service to come to you before your run or after your run. And by experiences, imagine being able to do a basketball training camp with someone like LeBron James. So how do you then kind of incentivize people to be able to participate in these things? So here's the case study film for that.
Done? Is that even a word in Shanghai? Halfway trainers, casual runners, once a month b-ballers? Looks like sport is just another fashion trend. Here's the thing, that's about to change. In 2018, we hijacked the Shanghai Marathon to launch Shanghai City Attack, Never Enough. An integrated campaign centered around a digital activation, Shanghai Never Done Shop. In this 360 retail space, choose any of the 6 sport categories to purchase Nike products, services, and experiences. But this ain't your everyday e-commerce site. Here, you can't use money. Here, you pay with good old-fashioned sweat and performance. That's right, in this shop, sweat equals currency. So link up your Nike Plus data and let's get started. Runners, come this way. Feeling the misery run? Then work for it. If you got a crew, you got a chance to run the next marathon. You a baller? Dope. Check out the Kyrie Spider Challenge. Dribble fast with mad skills to cop a pair of Kyrie 5s. See that pair of Janoskis? Upload your coolest skate video on Weibo and give us a shout out. You might just get a ticket home. Your friend in the football camp? Well, you can sign up for the Kicker Youth Camp too. Learn how to kick, shoot, and score. And if you're feeling all out of juice, don't rest just yet. Finish 3 NTC workouts to earn that training feel. Hold up, these events ain't just for athletes. Bring your craziest idea to portfolio days and show off your creative mind. See for yourself. This ain't just another online shop. It's a hub that connects every athlete in Shanghai. From online to offline and back again. We're making sport into a habit. Yep, we turned the city into a racetrack, connected gym, smart court, football field, skate ramp, portfolio review, and athlete community. Check out the numbers. All in just 3 weeks. Ready to live the spirit of never done? Now is your turn.
So again, kind of an example of using your mobile phone to be able to kind of look around you, but imagine it as being kind of an invisible layer that exists in the space that you're at, anywhere that you're at. And imagine being able to kind of shop, but in an experiential way, right? So rethinking how brands can kind of connect with their audiences, but do so through things that elevate the overall brand experience itself. So the second one was born in the pandemic itself, an example of where cinematic storytelling and gaming kind of intersect into one kind of experience that uses a game engine to build the world and tell a story firsthand in real time. So this is called the Joker's Escape. It's a virtual escape experience, not a room, because it's multiple chambers all in one that was essentially kind of designed by the Joker himself. So the background to this is when we were working with Warner Brothers, Weeby Games, who basically runs E3 as a kind of gaming franchise, but also Warner Brothers kind of runs Comic-Con. But obviously, every one of us here knows that in 2020, none of that could happen because there were no sort of on-ground experiences to be had since 2020 onwards, maybe up until now. So what we did was we co-developed a huge concept called DC Fandom. So imagine this being a 24-hour virtual event that gave fans kind of a sneak peek into DC's bigger franchise, engaging them through either exclusive reveals, trailers, panels, and online experiences. So it's a great example of how the two sort of biggest forces in entertainment industry, which is both gaming and film, and kind of merging that into one form expression that we haven't quite seen before. So imagine landing in a kind of virtual DC Disneyland and being able to kind of go through this 3-dimensional space. But hidden inside that, we created the Joker's Funhouse. It's essentially a fun house in a kind of trap that he created for you, and one that you could essentially live through or go through the story of in first person. So imagine it kind of more or less being a gamified film experience that again combined film storytelling and gaming into one and built on Unity 3D itself. So in many ways, in September 2020, this was kind of super ahead of its time in that people were trying to figure out what was going on with the world itself. But in some ways, this is kind of a forerunner into what we're calling the metaverse of today. So the idea is to step inside the Joker's mouth, and doing so got you trapped inside. So once you were inside his head, you then had to pick from 3 randomized doorways that you basically then got trapped and had to escape from. So imagine one of the rooms being Mask of Madness, which is essentially an emotional challenge where you had to laugh like the Joker, hysterically laugh like him in order to escape that room. And depending on your voice performance and accuracy of how well you delivered the Joker's laugh, determine whether you got trapped in there forever or you got to escape. This, one of the other challenges we had was called Joker Friend, Joker Foe, which is essentially a card game that tested your DC knowledge. So imagine how well you know the franchise itself, and if you knew whether who the Joker's friends and who his enemies were. So being able to then escape from that challenge simply through your sort of DC knowledge. And a third one being essentially kind of a bomb room, right? Where you go inside, this sort of Joker Jack-in-the-Box leaps out and essentially gives you 2 minutes to be able to defuse 5 bombs, or you blow up and basically die within that room right then and there. So those were kind of the 3 basic challenges that we had in there. But what I think was quite interesting about this project is it kind of repositions the viewer from being an observer into being an active participant in this kind of fully immersive, interactive story world that we created. So again, imagine experiential filmmaking meets immersive gaming and really building those 2 worlds to become one kind of narrative. And here's what that looked like.
With Comic-Con and E3 on hold in 2020, DC Comics and Warner Brothers launched DC Fandom, a 24-hour virtual live event that engaged fans through exclusive reveals, trailers, panels, and online experiences. Hidden within was an interactive funhouse designed to thrill fans by inviting them to step inside the Joker's head, in a first-of-its-kind virtual escape powered by Unity 3D and WebGL. Fans were ushered in to explore Joker's insanity in full cinematic 360 gameplay, across 3 interactive traps designed by the Clown Prince of Crime. Masks of Madness invited players to audition as the Joker by delivering their best impersonation of his maniacal laughs.
Do I really have to do this?
75.
In between challenges, fans drifted deeper into madness, traveling through a distorted and warped hall of laughter. Joker Friend, Joker Foe challenged you to a game of cards against the Joker. Hit his enemies to take them out. Hit his friends and lose time. Hit Joker and suffer his delirious laugh. Knock down all his enemies across 3 levels before they close in. Players traveled through an array of the Joker's vicious trophies and arsenal of weapons to get to the final challenge, the Kaboom Room. Inside the Joker's laboratory, Red Hood Joker surprised them with a deadly trap of explosive countdowns. Hunt down and disarm 5 bombs in 5 minutes before time runs out. To escape, fans needed to win all 3 challenges. Those who failed remained trapped forever.
You won, Joker.
Fans who made it out alive lived to see another day. A pioneering fusion of high-end immersive gaming and rich interactive storytelling, Joker's Escape put fans at the center of a first-person thriller, activating millions worldwide in over 144 countries, pushing online experiences to a whole new level.
I had finally escaped that goddamn escape room.
So that last young man basically spent 20 hours trying to do that escape room. And I've never seen such fan dedication in my entire life. So I think it's reactive, obviously, to your level of play, but also it dials things up and down depending on your responses. So this last example I'm going to show you is a very recent one that we created here at DDB in collaboration with the San Francisco and Chicago office for the Super Bowl. So I think it's a very good example of how brands are kind of starting to look into this thing called the metaverse and starting to infiltrate the spaces and places that they could connect with their audiences. And what was really kind of interesting about this project is that Miller Lite, as our client, had a very huge problem, which is the biggest beer brand on earth, which is AB InBev or Budweiser, was basically the sponsor of the Super Bowl. So effectively, that kind of cuts them out of any media buys because they weren't allowed to buy media for the Super Bowl itself, being a competitor. So then we asked ourselves, if we can't be there, where can we be? Right? So we said, cool, okay, hold our beer. And then we came up with this idea that essentially kind of allowed us to be able to steal the conversation away from Budweiser and do so with only 3% of the ad spend that they had when they were spending $7 million to actually create a football ad, we spent only 3% of that and went to a space that most people hadn't actually gone into just yet, right? And that was by going into the place that their lawyers couldn't stop us, which is the metaverse, because the metaverse is a free and open space, right? So in there, we did a couple of things that no brand had ever done before. The first of which is we built the first bar in the metaverse called the MetaLight Bar, where you could actually turn virtual beer into real beer. So meaning when you went into this bar and actually collected beer from there, you could redeem it for real life for your Super Bowl party. But the other thing that we did was quite interesting was we ran the first ever Super Bowl ad in the metaverse within that bar. So I think what's really great is, this spot kind of didn't take itself too seriously and actually made fun of the metaverse in how silly it was, the absurdity of the metaverse itself, but also really made fun of all the sort of cliche Super Bowl tropes that we've seen over the years. And in many ways, it's also making fun of ourselves and not taking things too seriously in order to kind of gain this huge sort of new momentum that was happening online. So what was great as a kind of result in here is that the bar became the most attended branded event in metaverse history so far, with sort of the average visitor spending 20 minutes in the bar itself. So just let that sink in, meaning if a Super Bowl spot is able to captivate an audience for about 1 or 2 minutes at most, but on the metaverse, you're able to really engage for fans for 20 minutes or if not more. I think that's a pretty interesting space to be playing in. But perhaps the greatest response that we got from that campaign is that we actually ended up crashing Decentraland because of such traffic volume that people coming in there. So I thought that was kind of an interesting moment in time for Miller's history. So even though that activation took place in the metaverse, the results were real, right? So meaning it gained a ton of sort of earned media, but also, as I said earlier, anyone who sort of purchased the beer during the Super Bowl was essentially kind of gaining Miller as the highest brand share over the last 5 years, in that everyone was sort of top of mind talking about this campaign during the Super Bowl itself. So with that in mind, here's the case film that's hot off the press that we've not really shown anywhere yet, except here's the first.
Miller Lite is opening a bar in the metaverse for the Super Bowl.
The beer maker opened its Meta Light Bar in the metaverse. It's a classic tavern stocked with Miller Lite.
What are they going to do in the metaverse, Jim?
It's a secret.
It's also exclusive because the metaverse bar will be the sole place where fans can watch Miller Lite's big game ad.
Welcome to the first big game ad in the metaverse.
How's it a big game ad if it's not even in the same universe as the big game?
Well, relatable farmer, because we have a culturally relevant pop star. And majestic horses.
What do horses have to do with beer?
America! And to appeal to the masses, we added puppies, avocados from another country, aliens, a Miller Lite robot, explosions, overly dramatic music, and more talking animals.
Oh, this Miller Lite beer ocean tastes great!
And in a not-so-subtle attempt to get press, we'll launch this ad exclusively in the metaverse.
Wait, where are we?
Well, it's just like reality, but with worse graphics.
Perfect for anyone who thought, man, I love commercials, but I wish I had to work harder to access them.
Miller Lite is creating a modern way to interact with a modern audience.
Miller Lite is running an ad during the game on the virtual reality platform Decentraland.
Miller Lite released its tongue-in-cheek game time ad in the metaverse.
What is a metaverse?
So I love that example because obviously it signals a very different way that brands can kind of start, really connecting with their audiences. So I wanted to end by sharing with you a few principles I came up with and kind of subscribed to, which has helped guide me in my personal creative approach in exploring the new, the now, and the not yet. The first is really about rejecting what's normal, that as creatives, we need to defy convention, resist and reject the status quo. It's a personal challenge that I kind of give myself to never go down the same roads I've been before, but also to swim in the unknown waters, which is in many ways and many times often scary, and because it's unfamiliar, right? Not a lot of people sort of go there, meaning when it's unknown and it's something that you haven't done before yourself. But I believe that this challenge only brings about the best in us. And as they say, nothing ventured, nothing gained. This next one is 1 + 1 = 3. And it's a simple enough equation that questions logic. But to me, if creativity is about connecting disparate dots, then we need to pull from the wider dots that exist out there, the less similar ones, and perhaps the less obvious dots, because the formula goes beyond ideas, but can also be applied into how we collaborate, how we structure ourselves, how we even build the teams. So it goes without saying that one type of mind and one type of thinking multiplied by a similar type of mind will only probably yield the same type of thinking. But if you put one mind that's kind of very different and diverse from the other, and perhaps complementary, I think that in itself kind of ends up yielding something more exponential in terms of the results. So again, it's about putting two disparate things that don't necessarily belong together and really kind of creating a beautiful collision between them. This third one is about being borderless. And I think by now you've kind of seen my approach to advertising is no different than my approach to design itself, as well as user journey and user experiences, or this blending between the traditional and the digital. And to me, it's really about creating borderless creativity, in that it's more about not having silos or divisions between disciplines, but really looking at it as sort of one expression throughout. The fourth one is really, to me, about cultivating an innovation mindset. I think it's fair to say that we live in a time of rapid change, and throughout history, we are the products of our own imagination and invention. So to me, it's important to kind of daydream about the possibilities, but more so, really kind of put it on yourself to rethink and think about how do you form a new world, and therefore that new world requires new rules and therefore new expressions. And just think of it this way: if cavemen had the brains to discover fire, what's our new fire, right? And that's sort of one sort of thought that I kind of live with on a daily basis and daily level, in that I'd love to challenge myself and the team to always kind of think, if prehistoric people were able to create and invent such big things, we should be able to do so ourselves. And the fifth one is something that I kind of, ingrained within me, no matter sort of where I go and sort of work in the world. And it's about experimenting now, not later, and really kind of in building research and development, so that you basically kind of put that as your process, meaning how do we apply new ways of thinking, new ways of technology, and kind of really bringing that into the process itself. This next one, I think, is a classic, in that the medium is the message. So I think it goes without saying that as the medium has changed over the last 25 years, it's fair to say it's going to change in the next 5 years and probably accelerate. So I think that the era of AR sort of wearables and sort of AR media is probably what's going to transform the world over the next 2 to 3 years. And as such, I think we should all be thinking in that level and that space of expression. But perhaps the biggest factor that's driving organizational change today is about changing the very nature of how we do things, how we rethink work itself, right? So to me, it's beyond this whole thing of working virtual or working remote or working in office. It's kind of a bigger mindset than that. It's really about changing the way that we create, the way that we think, and the way that we collaborate, right? And really going beyond strict sort of legacy rules and legacy models and how people used to work. The world that we were born into is very different than the world that we live in today. And we are living in what is perhaps the most creative moment in history. This is my 11-year-old daughter now. Her tomorrow will be very different than my world that I grew up in and your world that you're growing up in right now. In 7 years, she's probably going to graduate high school and enter a very different world that's vastly different than the one she was born in, light years ahead of where I was born into. we have within us the power and the opportunity to shape that world of where humanity and where all of us as a global race can go into next. But the new world requires new thinking. It requires new ideas and therefore new expressions. Because 21st century problems require 21st century solutions. And I believe creative innovation is the key to unlocking the new, the now, and the not yet. And creativity and innovation will be the thing that defines and owns the future, because creativity and innovation will power what's next. But to do this, we have to give ourselves to the present in order to create the future, in order to invent tomorrow today. Thanks so much for spending some time with me, and I hope you got something out of it. And if there's any questions, I'd love to answer any of them.
Yeah, so you can just add questions to the chat, or you can just kind of raise your hand or just kind of say it out loud if you want.
Go for it, Jessica.
Hi, Eric. My name is Jessica. I'm a second-year XD. Thank you so much for coming to speak with us. This is the kind of conversation that's right up all of our alleys, I feel like, right now. A little bit of background. I was a fashion major also at BCU Arts Fashion Merchandising. I've been asked to come speak to an undergrad class on Monday, and I'm pulling a lot of inspiration from this presentation. In that class in particular, I was going to focus on integrated experiences. So my question for you is, if in your work right now and what you're passionate about, are you really only thinking digital first, or are you still thinking about those integrated experiences, even just standalone physical experiences? And what in particular in those areas excites you, like in the case and experiences with physical interactions that was required? Or are you personally thinking more so in metaverse, in nature of experiences?
It's a very good question. And I would love to clarify that by kind of qualifying it as today's topic kind of really dove deep into the virtual spaces and places and experiences that result from that. But I do think that the world is not going to become fully virtual. And I think, technologies such as AR, I didn't mention it, but I worked on the Facebook Meta wearables, right? The Ray-Ban that basically has the cameras on it. And that to me is kind of an on-ramp into the world of devices and sort of wearables that Meta itself is obviously trying to define and own. But it's no secret that places like Apple, like Google are also, everyone is basically trying to define that next world. And so the point of that being is the real world will never go away. It's going to be much more immersive in ways where, imagine wearing a contact lens, even without your wearable, and being able to kind of mediate and transact the world, meaning be able to kind of work without a laptop keyboard because the keyboard is sort of virtual and hovering above the space that you're on, but also kind of being able to mediate, how you get entertained and how you play, how you work, but also how you live is going to be more and more integrated. So again, hopefully that answers your question in that the focal point for today was really diving into that. But there's a whole other body of work that I've explored to where it's about the sort of intersection between the real and the virtual. And I think that's when it gets most interesting as an overall experience.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Very, very helpful, very insightful.
You're welcome.
Awesome. I think Kat has a question in the chat. She says, what would you recommend or like, what do you say to clients to encourage them to kind of jump into the metaverse if they're hesitant of at first taking the risk?
I think it's one of those things, right? Where as I said in the beginning, I began my career in '96. And back then, I was born into that world where everyone was sort of afraid to go into this thing called the World Wide Web and build a website. And that was circa 1995, right? But I think early adopters have kind of gone warp speed, and it's no longer even about brands being afraid to go in, because a lot of brands are already jumping in and investing because they see the value and the sort of net worth of what the sort of $3 trillion economy of Web 3.0 will become. right? And so when you see signals like Sony Music, Warner Music, all going into places like Sandbox and Decentraland and Roblox, when you see Vans World being created within Roblox and Nike Playland being also created in those spaces and places, and obviously, you know, Ariana Grande, Travis Scott, all of these sort of musicians. Snoop Dogg just released a music video that was basically from Sandbox this morning, right? That's hot off the press. You guys should definitely check that out. It's no secret, and it's no, I don't foresee there being a lot of friction. And I think actually brands are much more welcoming than I thought they would be. So there's obviously Nike sort of investment in things like Artifact, the digital sort of sneaker pioneers. And so when you see moves like that, I think it's quite inspirational for every other brand to figure out their sort of metaverse strategy. So much so that, you know, the word chief metaverse officer is in people's sort of heads. And when we talk to CEOs around the world, certainly even places like, you know, Gucci or Coach, they are getting together on their sort of metaverse strategy of what's going to happen, you know, in the next 2 to 3 years ahead. Any other questions I could answer for anyone?
Cool. Well, oh, okay. Madeline, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Madeline. I'm a first-year art director. I'm also Filipino American, so this was like really inspiring for me personally. But I have a question about like the creative process. Like, what's the like? You've had a long history of like in the industry, and obviously advertising is kind of leading towards more of a digital realm these days. So what's like what's different about the creative process when it comes to like immersive storytelling and AR, VR versus like traditional ad campaigns?
It's a very good question, because it's a question that every agency is sort of trying to tackle. And I think if you look at what's happening in LinkedIn, there's an evolution that's been happening since like the last 15 years. If you pay attention to Cannes Advertising Festival, they have renamed that as a kind of creativity festival sometime in 2012, 2013. And that kind of reached that tipping point back then in terms of, you know, things like cyber being renamed into digital, but also all these sort of different sectors of advertising popping up, such as, you know, data storytelling and brand experiences and so on. And so I think for me, when I rode this wave about 23, 25 years ago, we were one of the first in the world to create this thing called branded content. And this is before branded content was in the zeitgeist of things. So I think to me, the whole process of how you imagine and sort of create campaigns has already shifted because of things like user journeys, user experiences, and really how design itself has become kind of a bigger force in advertising. And what I mean by that is, you know, most advertising people would probably look at design as a third leg, meaning once the concept is done, you basically enlist a designer to basically, you know, make things look pretty, for lack of a better word. But I think in most cases, the agencies that are ahead, such as places like Wieden Kennedy, have been experimenting and exploring what design could do for advertising, and that design could be used for moving culture. But also of recent, when we look at some of the examples out there of how, you know, things like information architecture, data insights, and therefore data storytelling, as well as user journeys and user experiences, it basically has repositioned brands to rethink their whole sort of comms strategy, away from just pure comms into more experiential and into brand activations or brand acts, as well as this bigger umbrella of brand connections. And what that really means is advertising itself is evolving and changing, and therefore the process of how you approach a campaign needs to go much wider. And what that means is think ecosystem level, right? So think, how do you engage not just through a film, but through platforms, through social, and now through immersive Web 3.0 spaces, right? So I think more and more, that's probably how you all should be thinking about your approach, whether you're doing advertising or other forms of creativity, such as creative strategy and such, right? It's not enough to sort of be sort of, pinpoint focus in terms of what's our big idea and what's the story behind it, it probably behooves all of us to think, much more, I hate using the word 360, but much more holistically and in many ways, meeting people where they're at, right? Meeting people where they're at, which is, I can't remember the last time I watched TV, right? With the exception of things like the Super Bowl or the NBA finals or things like that. So if that's the only sort of few moments that you have to be able to do that, then what's going to allow us to kind of go to the spaces and places where people are natively at, right? Such as platforms, such as the real world, but evolving the real world into something more immersive, more experiential, more brand touch points that exist out there invisibly in the air, as it were.
Thank you.
You're welcome.